First of all, I would like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional custodians and builders of the land upon which we meet. I would like to welcome everyone here in the rooms and also those of you who are joining us on Zoom. Thank you very much for coming along tonight. Our guest speaker this evening is our member Beverley Richardson, who's going to speak to us about the Cessnock Coalfields and its Scottish connections. Beverley is a very keen member of our Scottish Special Interest Group, which meets on the second Tuesday of the month. She's also a very keen writer, having recently won a very prestigious award. She also enjoys contributing to the Caledonian newsletter and our journal. So I'm going to invite Beverley to come over here and I'll take a seat and keep it warm over here for you. This was just a little talk that I gave last year for the Scottish Special Interest Group to get people writing about John the Pit for the journal, some stimulus material, which is what you do when you're a teacher and you want to write a couple of stimulus material to get them moving. And I think it worked on a couple of people. But for this speech, I've added to it and I think we can change it. So I hope it's better. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Awabakal people, traditional owners of the land on which we meet. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. A fortnight ago, I drove north to Harrington near Taree to celebrate the 70th birthday of a friend and colleague. We taught together at West 14 High School in the 1980s. At that time, the little country school served families connected with the Westfield Zen mine, which was originally owned by the Glasgow-based Scottish investment company, Caledonian Collieries. Quite early in the afternoon, a pleasant, somewhat serious, gentle giant of a man introduced himself. He said he'd been a small boy in one of my Year 8 English classes at Westfield. On leaving school, he'd become an electrician, he explained, working underground in the mines, currently at Orion. Then he introduced his wife and baby. As I was leaving, I found him waiting at the door, intent on showing me a photograph stored on his mobile phone. It was a simple image, a statement to do with manpower and mateship. Clothed in high vis, he was underground, standing in the glare of artificial light with two mine worker friends. I wondered why it was important for him to reconnect with his old teacher and to show me the photo. On reflection, I believe his serious, almost sad bearing was because he was facing the imminent loss of a way of life that had sustained his ancestors for generations and put bread on the table. Orion Power Station is slated for closure in 2027, and the 5 mines that supply the coal via road, rail and conveyor belt will close too. We might show the clip now, please. Oh, by the way, before it goes, I love these clips. There's about, how many, Clive, are there on YouTube?
At least 5.
At least 5. And it's a technology that young men seem to have taken, and they have to plan what they're doing. They have to master the technology, write a script, present it, research the history, all the things that I was wishing boys would do when I taught them, you know, doing it on their own because they love rail history. They love walking down a railway track. They love the sight of a water tower. They love walking through the bush and finding little bits of metal treasures that they hold up and then they carefully put them back into place. So I thought I'd start with this clip of the Aberdare South mine ruins and the Kitchener mine, which was called Aberdare Central in the day. and they're about 2.5 kilometres apart through the bush. And when Aberdare South Mine was closed in 1927, the Caledonian Coal Company owned a lot of cottages, and they simply put them on the back of a bullock tray or somehow, got them through the bush and put them on the side of the Aberdare Central mine, which was still going. So this is of the two mines, and if you go to Kitchener, the pocket head is still there. Let's play that. Professor Sir T.W. Edgeworth David and his memorial, which is at Charlotte. I haven't been to see this, but I'm sure it's there. If you've ever driven out of Newcastle West and found yourself in Edgeworth on the main road to Westwell's End, or in Holmesville, a small distance south of Western, if you've driven out of Maitland towards Rita and noticed the sign Tester's Hollow, or ventured even further through Cessnock, through Belvoir, and onto the Great North Road at Wollongong, then you have been engaging with the early mining history of Cessnock. When in flood time, pieces of coal, called black diamonds, were washed down the creeks, in the forests and on the farms, and into the view of the general public. A military officer conducting a survey for the Great North Road sketched the coal outcrops at Belvoir. An old lady used coal found at Black Creek, that's in Cessnock mid-field, as fuel for a fire, on which she boiled some fruit and made jam. The Reverend William Braithwaite Clark found evidence of coal at Homeville and Stone Creek, Stony Creek runs down beside Chenango High School, and they used to have the swim races in the creek in the early days of high school. So Reverend William Braithwaite Clark found evidence in that creek. But it is widely believed that Professor Sir William Edgeworth David discovered the Greta Coalfields after a farmer named William Tester notified the New South Wales Department of Mines that he had found pieces of coal in the creek on his property. The Greta seam was and is one of the great coalfields of the world, with coal 32 feet thick in places, of very high quality, low ash and low sulphur. Excellent for the manufacture of gas. It was the rich measures of the Greta seam which ushered in the 20th century era of modern, heavy capitalised public companies dominating the coal fields. And that last piece is a quote from a book called The Coal Masters by Christopher Jay. And he explains that the very first coal in Newcastle on the coast was conducted by the colonial government and the Labor responded Labor. And they went down into the dark that they dug, and they stayed there all week. And then they came up at the weekend, they could wash their clothes in the sea and have a wash themselves. And they brought all the coal up by buckets. And the moisture in the water in the mine was also removed by buckets. So the government wanted to get rid of that system, and so they opened up land to public companies to mine the coal at the Greta seam. Just a postscript to that. T.W. Edgeworth David was the government surveyor. He was born in 1858, and he was the son of a Welsh clergyman. He had an arts degree, but his father liked collecting fossils, and that sort of interested him in science and geology. And he applied for a job with the Department of Mines in New South Wales, and he got it. He met his future wife, Carolyn Mallet, a teacher, on the ship out to Australia. She gave up her career as principal of Helston Training College for Women Teachers for marriage to T.W. Edgeworth David. She accompanied her husband to the northern coalfield, cooked and washed in camp, and filled in the long days reading, sewing, and studying plates and flowers. So he said to people, look, I didn't really discover the coal, but he was such a glorious, educated man. I said, yes, you did, you take it, you know. And so he's down as being the discoverer of coal. Would have been better if the old lady making jam got the time. Anyway, next slide, please. Slide. The Campbell brothers. There's Black Creek. It's in a park just opposite the pool. And there's a plaque in the pool grounds set into the ground to honour the Campbell brothers. And that's a plan of the land that they sold it was carved up into plots and became Cessnock. Okay, the Campbell brothers. A pleasant activity for you and your family on an early spring or late autumn day is to walk the 26 stations of the history of Cessnock Walk. The guide is available on the internet. Park your vehicle close to Vincent Street, once the main road in Cessnock Central Business District, and begin at Station 1, the Central Cessnock Fire Station. The terrain is flat and dining opportunities are available along the way. Station 28 is the John Campbell Memorial, a difficult to find plaque set in the ground near Cessnock Pool. The story of the Campbell brothers, John and David, is worthy of an episode of Outlander, starring the three surviving sons of the old Laird of Treesbank, Ayrshire, an ancient family and well connected. The eldest, George, inherits the land and title, becoming the new Laird, while John, 21, and David, 18, must make do with £1,500 each. They choose to emigrate as free settlers to New South Wales, where they requested Governor Darling a grant of land in which they will invest their inheritance. With the Governor's authority, John selects 4 square miles on Black Creek. David, too, invests his money in venture. Thinking of their homeland, they choose for the estate the name Cessnock, suggesting their descent from the Lairds of Cessnock estate. The brothers clear and burn off the native scrub so they can sow wheat and build cottages, but their dreams evaporate when David dies while staying in a house in Castlereagh Street, Sydney. Grief-stricken, David returns to Scotland, where he is reunited with his remaining brother. He meets a young lady and falls in love. He does not return to the colonies. The Cessnock estate is sold in 1853 as farms and allotments, from which the village of Cessnock emerges. So, in the Cessnock in Scotland, there is a castle, and that's a sketch of the old castle. That's a map. That's on the internet, and it just shows the Cessnock area and all of the little towns. Most of those little towns were the centre of a mine, and they were just surrounded by bush. And the one I'm going to talk about, can you make that a bit bigger? It's Abernethy, and you can see it just there. Yeah. The English writer Anthony Trollope, in the 1880s, he was given an assignment by his publisher to come out to the colonies and to write 2 volumes on the colonies. And the thing that he noticed about the mines was that they were so isolated and surrounded by bush. And all of these little towns would have had shafts sunk and a few cottages springing up, probably with hessian walls, and the miners would get to work on the terms of the owner of the mine, which wasn't all that much money. All right. This is a quote from a book called The Uphomers. This man, Patrick W. Chappell, wrote his memoir about growing up on the coalfields and growing up in Aberdeen in the same time as my mother. He was about 3 years younger than my mother, I think. And what he says is, during the 1940s and 1950s, our town was literally surrounded by coal mines. To the east, there was Aberdeen Sharp, Aberdeen North and South collieries, Neath, Ellington and Aberdeen number 1 and 2. To the south, Aberdeen Central. In a westerly direction was to be found Aberdeen Extended, Aberdeen number 7, Bellberg, Pelton, Millfield, Kalingo and Paxton collieries. There were 2 collieries that had been developed in the centre of Cessnock, Cumnock and Hill End, and they're just near the church. There's a set of white steps going up the hill to Catholic Church, and those 2 little collieries were around that there. Most of these mines were controlled from afar by the Caledonian Coal Company, especially the ones beginning with Aberdeen, even though Aberdeen is a Welsh name. The Caledonian Coal Company had made some bad investments in the early 20th century and had lost a lot of money, and so they bought up a lot of mines on the Cessnock Coalfields that had a lot of potential because of the richness of the wetter seam coal. Most of the mines were controlled afar by the Caledonian Coal Company. The Caledonian Society ran the annual concert. The Cessnock Caledonian Choir were frequent winners at the Abernethy Stedford. Caledonian collieries supported football teams, and contributed to Cessnock hospital funds. Streets bearing the name Caledonia appear in both Cessnock and Aberdeen. My family boarded trains for Cessnock and Newcastle at Caledonia Station, and my grandfather's favourite watering hole was the Caledonian Hotel just down the road from his house on Aberdeen Road. So I got that picture of Caledonia Station from Greg Ray's Time Tunnel site because I was trying to work out how long it went for. And that picture was from 1954. So it was still looking okay then. But there was a railway junction behind it called Aberdeen Station. So it was a bit confusing. Yeah, and that Caledonia Street is that one's in Cessnock. You can see how wide the streets are. Very, very wide streets. That's the pub, Caledonia Hotel. And that's the one in Aberdeen. And they just put a bit of tar down the centre of the street. And they have a lot of trouble maintaining the streets. They've got one of those, the Doctor Road schemes going to try to keep the roads safe. All right, next slide, please. Why I was born in Cessnock and why my mother was born in Cessnock, 20 years apart. It was because of this man. He was my great-great-grandfather, William Toomey, and he had a tailor shop in Kelly Street in Scone. And there's the shop with him standing on the veranda, and I think that must be my grandmother on the rocking chair, and the baby might be William. And it is a prosperous family, but behind closed doors there was not so much of a secret. He was an alcoholic. And the family story goes that I think he might have been a violent alcoholic as well. One night, Sophie locked him out, and he went to sleep on the steps of the business, caught pneumonia, and died. He's in Scone Cemetery, and there was no money. He was a gambler as well. So Sophie had to come down to Newcastle to get the support of her 5 sisters. And she cleaned at the Junction School, and she got peritonitis and died as well. And so my grandmother and her 2 brothers became state wards, and they were put into the care of the sisters. They took on their care. The elder boy, John, I was looking at William's will this afternoon. He still had Sophie, his dear wife, as his executor. And he left his belongings, his estate to Sophie and the children. But to John, the eldest boy, he left a corner block of land in Scone as well. So John was a lucky boy. His sister and his younger brother didn't get anything extra. John stayed with a sister in Newcastle, and he was raised by her. The other 2 were raised by another sister who was married to a miner in Cessnock and lived in Aberdeen Road, and that's how come my mother was born in Cessnock Hospital. My grandmother, Ina, she married George Lloyd, who came from a mining family in Wales, and that's how come I was born in Cessnock Hospital as well, because my father was fishing when I was born. So that's how come the connection. John stayed with his aunt Emily Wallace, and Ina and William went to Cessnock to be raised with Aunt Edith Sellers and her 2 sons, Ernest and Francis. So it was a big task that she took on. But that's the way the family is. You know, they supported each other and they loved each other and cared for each other. And that's the way Cessnock is real as well. Very close knit community.
Loyalty is very strong.
It is. Okay, the next slide is my Lloyd family. The picture on the left is my grandmother's wedding. You can see she's there in the front row, just in a plain white dress, no veil. She didn't go into those things. And her very handsome husband is beside her. That's my grandfather, George Lloyd. And behind them and around them are the brothers and sisters of George, my grandfather. The one at the front is May, and behind her is Mary. I think there's Lizzie, and the brothers are all around. He has 3 brothers, I think, Robert, Ted, and the other one. But they're all there at the wedding. It was 1928, so that's probably another reason there wasn't much money at that time in history for a big wedding. And the next person in the middle is my great grandfather, Thomas Lloyd, who was a miner. When he had a funeral, they had buses to cope with the crowds that were there because he was a unionist as well. And beside him is my great grandmother, Lizzie, she was called, or Fanny. And she was a real character. She had all those children, and she kept a sort of on the veranda of a Sunday. She had all the family visit. Could you sort of broaden it out a bit, please? And she would pass around the jar of boiled lollies. But Grace, in the last picture, my Aunt Grace, who married Bill, my grandmother's younger brother, she was a Catholic and she never got offered a lolly. Oh. Okay. So that's all of the Toomey and the Lloyd family. My grandfather didn't go into the mines. He worked at the co-op store all of his life. He was the second oldest son. And his older brother, Robert, he didn't go into the mines. He had a shop in Rawson Street, Cessnock, that sold tobacco and other goods. Maybe the life of their father sort of made them believe that they didn't want the same for themselves. It was a very hard life. Okay, living in Cessnock. These are the houses. I went around and found the houses. This is the house where the Lloyd family grew up. It's in Northcott Street, Cessnock. 115 Northcott Street over there. And I like it because there's a tent out the back. And I think the people are renovating the house and living in the tent out the back while they renovate it. But that's where Tom and Lizzie and all of those children live. The house up the top on the right is where my grandfather lived. That's on Aberdeen Road. It's still there. And my mother said that it's at 103 Aberdeen Road, Cessnock, that his brothers helped him to build that house. It's got weatherboard down the sides and the brick ground and lovely glass in the front of it. And the house below is the one where Grace and Bill live. I don't know why they painted it that colour. They do that. It's like a little time capsule, Cessnock. The houses haven't been changed much over time. And actually, Kevin McLeod visited Cessnock. You know, the man on the TV.
Yeah, great.
Grand Designs. I think he might have gone to the vineyards, but he did say about the gun barrel houses. I don't think they're really gun barrel because they're not quite long enough, but he called them gun barrel houses. He says, I loved Cessnock in the Hunter Valley. I photographed almost every house along the main road, 1920s and 1930s domestic architecture, low to the ground and with a veranda. We don't value that era in the UK, and we don't do ground hugging architecture well. So yes, that's where I spent my holidays, in my grandfather's house and in my aunt's house. Every 6 weeks, holidays at Christmas time, I'd go up there. So next slide, please. This is John Toomey, who stayed in Newcastle, the older brother, with his money. I think he must have sold his block of land in Spain. That's him in his first suit. And when he married, in the next one, these are the houses that he lived in. His wife, my Aunt Edith, inherited those houses from her father. She supported the family during the Depression. She worked at the Arnott's Biscuit factory, and she gave her wage to the family and brought home bags of broken biscuits. And I think that he gave her those houses as a reward when he died. It's a big reward, but still, that's where she lived. Those houses are gone now, and they've put a sort of a funny little replica houses on the side, you know, with little gables to echo what was there, the way they do. But they weren't very, the big house, it's green, the one on the right, you can see it's got an attic up the top. I used to stay in that attic. I used to think it was wonderful. And but the front door right onto the road wasn't very convenient. They didn't ever use that door. And the next one, this is probably what he also did with his money. He bought himself a car. So that's his first car. That's a lucky boy.
What year?
Oh, that would have been in the my mother was born in 1931, so it would have been in the 1920s. I saw no sign of him having a car in London. Anyway, moving on. Living in Cessnock. My mother wanted me to know with her kin, her family. She wanted us all to know her family. And we lived at Little Pelton first of all, and then Belmont. And so every few weeks we'd drive up to Cessnock and we'd stay there overnight usually. We'd drive along the back way over the gap. And this man here, he says in his book that that was the quickest way at the time to get to Cessnock, because he did it by bicycle. He and his mate rode their bicycles from Cessnock to Blacksmith Beach. Yes. Yeah, Freeman's Waterhole through the gap, yeah. So we had a second-hand Holden car, and quite often we'd get a flat tyre. My mother would just get out and squat on the ground and change the tyre, and we'd get on our way, and then the radiator might boil. Scared the daylights out of me because she already had a pressure cooker that had blown up and put the dinner all over the kitchen ceiling. So I used to sit there wanting to run away, but there was nowhere I could run to because I'd get lost. I had to watch her unscrew the cap and pour the water in. And we'd get on our way and she'd see a cow or a horse in a paddock and we'd have to get out the buckets and fill them up with the manure. And we'd take that home for the garden. That's the way things were. And then just before Kersley, we'd turn off to the left and go down in the bush to this old dam site. And all that was left was a tall chimney, a ruined engine house, and the pit dam. And we'd pick blackberries, fill up the bowls with blackberries and put them back in the car, and then we'd get to Aberdare, where she would make blackberry pie for tea. So we used to stay overnight and we could hear the trains shunting in the morning. They'd wake me up. And I've got two cousins that are still living on the Coalfields. They were my flower girls at my wedding. And I was telling them about it, and they said, Beverley, you could hear the shunting all over Cessnock. It wasn't just at the back of George's house. It was all over Cessnock. That's how I came to Cessnock. I would stay at my aunt's place as well, where she would take all my mother's clothes off me. Play clothes, we called them. That's what she made on a Singer sewing machine. And I would be turned into a dog, like I'd have a dress made with a crochet collar. My hair would be curled and a total transformation. And that would be for going down to Vincent Street on Friday. That was where you showed off your family. And she was a Catholic. She had lots of nieces working in the shops. And we'd have to call in on Gwenny and Margie and Shirley and have a talk. And her brother-in-law, who owned the butcher shop. And then we would come home and we would pick a cucumber and a tomato and an onion out of the garden. We'd have sandwiches with the fresh bread we bought from Sylvester's Bakery, which was on the History Walk, actually. And then when Uncle Bill came home from the mine, we'd have homemade sponge cake with jam and cream and cups of tea. It was a very nice life, full of really good food. And the picture is of the school. I had to stay at that school for 6 weeks once my mother got sick with all of the busyness of raising children and stuff. She burst her appendix and nearly died. So I stayed with my family up there and went to that school. And that's Aberdeen Public School. That's where my mother went to school. And the next shot is of the hospital. I crept around the back and found these old buildings that haven't been demolished. I think that's the old hospital where I must have been born, those buildings. I don't know what they're going to do with them, but they're still there. And the next one is of my mother at school. She's the one in the middle with the pearls and the uniform and the bow in her hair, looking like Shirley Temple. And that was her house. And the next one, on the Coalfields, Patrick Chappell writes about the dogs. I mean, he was a boy and he was in a boys' gang. This was in primary. He had a boys' gang and they roamed around the coalfields, swimming in all the dams. And they all had a dog each. And I think the parents probably felt that the kids were safe because the dogs were with them and protecting them. But they did hair-raising things, like they'd make bottle bombs and they'd throw them on the snakes lacing on the leaves on the top of the dams, things like that. And they'd shoot things with shanghais and had a great time, marvellous time. So that's my mother with her dog. His name was Spot. And my Uncle Bill, he also had a little foxy dog called Paddy. Dogs were important to this community, and they were like part of the family. That's what Patrick W. Chappell writes. All right, moving on, please, Clive. These are the co-op store buildings that my grandfather worked in. They're on the Heritage Walk, the History Walk. There was one at Bellbird, which is now no longer there, the librarian told me. There's one at Kersley, and there was one at Weston, and there's the central one in Vincent Street in Cessnock. And the one at Weston, I went inside, and big polished wooden counter is still there in that building. It's an op shop now, I think. And the wooden floorboards are still there. But yes, that time was past when we could go to the store. It was housed on the corner of Vincent Street and Aberdare Road, and the store was started in 1907 with a membership of 34 and an initial share capital of £123. By 1920, it had 1,433 members and a turnover of £180,000 and over 80 employees. In 1957, it was reported to have 172 employees and a turnover of well over £830,000. So there was one in Aberdare, and Aberdare was separate to Cessnock. It had its own little picture theatre, it had its own butcher shop, it had its own store and a few other buildings, and gradually it just sort of merged. And the picture theatre went when TV came and butcher shop closed when the big supermarkets arrived, and the two places merged into one. Okay, next one, please, Clive. It was very hot on the coalfields in summer, and there were the trains at the back of my grandfather's place, and so my family would hop on the train and they would go to the coast. And so on the left is my grandmother, looking like her father there, I think, in the face, and my grandfather at Spears Point Park, I think they would have taken a train to Popper Creek. There was a station at Popper Creek and a little branch line. And the next one is my mother at Manly Beach. So they must have gone there. I don't know who this lifesaver is, but there she is. And the next one is of my grandmother and her sister-in-law, Mary. And I think that one's at the lake as well, looking very coy under an umbrella. And the next one is Bill, the miner, and John, and my grandfather with my, can you see my mother in that shot? Right? Cut off, is it? My mother's in that one too. And my Uncle John was a lifesaver at Newcastle Beach. So that's where they are there. But the mines closed for 6 weeks at Christmas time, and they would come down to a little cottage that they had at Rivercote and fish and prawn, and they had a piano, so they had sing-alongs and get rid of the coal dust, and then they'd go back. Okay. So now we come to the Abernethy Dam. That's the pub as it appears now. And that's the book that I really like because it's written by a school teacher. It's written by a man who went to Abernethy Public School. His name's Neville Robinson, and he was an English teacher and an English history teacher living in Wollongong. That must have been his last appointment. And he decided to write this book about Abernethy. And he tells you at the back how he went about writing it. You know, he contacted people that he remembered from school and asked them to ask their fathers questions. And he had access to a lot of photographs that he found. And yes, he wrote this lovely book. At times, he's more English than history, especially when he's writing about the environment, the bush around the mine. You know, he's obviously loves the environment. So Abernethy, moving on. It's all up there in your notes. You know, we changed players now in this story to a man called Alexander Shedden, another Scotsman. The Scots were sending letters home about how wonderful and cheap the land was here. You know, how you could, for little money, you could make a fortune if you worked hard. And it was in the newspapers as well. And they were out here, they were educated, they were engineers, they were knowledgeable people, and they forged ahead in this society. And that's what Trollope said in his book that he wrote about the colonies. If you're here and you're young and fit and you want to work, you can make yourself a fortune. You can get land like you could never own back in the old country. So Abernethy is a place in Scotland as well. And that's a picture that I got off the internet. It has a main tower on the edge of the cemetery. Aberdare is a Welsh name, but Abernethy and Cessnock are Scottish names. Moving on. Right, this place called Siberia, when they decided to sink the Shah, a lot of men arrived. You know, word gets around where the work is, and they arrived and they set up a little humpy town near the workings, near the sinking of the Shah. The dwellings were mainly made of wood, a wooden frame, and then over that you would place fruit bags, if you could get them, and you would line the inside with newspapers and magazines. And you would use flour and water glue to glue it all on for your lining. And then you would, you could put certain oils on the bags on the outside to make it a bit waterproof. Put tallow on it. So this humpy village sprang up, and a lot of the people there were refugees from Russia. You know, the turmoil that was going on in that country, those people had fled. And so you get these names, the Besovs, the Cosmovs, the Kalamanskys, Golgotskys, and Cousins. And I told the Scottish group that my friend, Janely Besov, who was a science teacher at Newcastle High School, her great-grandfather is on the first school roll for the Abernethy School. So her ancestors were Russian refugees from this time, and they landed in Siberia. It was also very isolated, and that was another reason. And Patrick Chappell doesn't ever call it anything other than Siberia. You know, he just calls it Siberia. So moving on, first of all, the bullet teams had to go in and they had to carve out a road into the site. Mr. Shedden had obviously put down some sort of machinery and found the coal there, and then he brought in the bullet teams. They would cut down the timber and save that for crops in the pit to prop up the roof and make sure it was as safe as they could. And these were the jobs that the men did. The wheelers were the ones that they used horses, pit ponies, and they could drag 2 skips of loaded coal from the coal face back to the cage, and then the wheelers would take charge and they would put the skips onto the branch line and stuff like that. And the skips would have to be weighed so that the authorities knew how much coal had been extracted from the mine, because it was all to do with economics. You know, the mine had to be viable. So that was all the jobs that were available in the mines. As you can see, the Caledonian Coal Company had to lay out a lot of money to get this mine operational. And it was going to be the biggest mine in the Southern Hemisphere. They started it up in 1913. That's when it started producing coal. Moving on, please, Craig. This is sinking the shaft. This was a very dangerous job. They had to sink the shaft so that they could put the cage down. There had to be two, one for ventilation. They had a big floor machine that would go down and floor up the earth and bring it up, right, and put it into a skip. I think that's how it operated. And there, the workforce that was sinking the shaft up this pit in the bush in the days it was operational. Moving on. This was the women's work. It's quite sad, you know. A lot of them didn't learn English. A lot of them didn't communicate with people outside their houses. They just hid in their houses. Yeah. It wasn't a very sanitary sort of environment to be in. I know when my mother grew up in Aberdeen Road in that house, in my grandfather's house, her cousin lived in the house behind, and he had 4 children, and 2 of them died. That was in the 1930s. One of them died of yeah, and the other one died of leukemia. I didn't know what it was, so she was just put in a room in a hospital in Sydney and not allowed to see anybody because they thought it was contagious at that stage. So she was only about 2. So they lost 2 of their 4 children. But, you know, swimming in the pit dam, I mean, this man talks about one of the dams where the shower and effluent had run into the pit dam, and it was this eerie light blue colour. And 2 young boys came up from Sydney for a holiday and they went swimming in that dam and both of them died. So the boarding houses were for single men who were working to bring their family out. And the hotel also had rooms up the top for single men who would work and save their money for their family to come in. There was like a tinker who used to come and go around and sell trinkets and ribbons and material and stuff like that for the women. And there were a few jobs, like in the post office and in the boarding house meal, in the meal houses, you know, where they put out food for the miners, a breakfast before they went on the ship. The single miners who didn't have a wife, they would make a lunch that the miners could buy or take with them down the ship, or they'd make a dinner for them to come in. But this lady here, coal miner's daughter, she writes about the hotels. She grew up with an alcoholic miner father. And she said the hotels were always situated in between the mine and the home, so that the miner had to go past the hotel on his way home. And also writes about how much salt you lost when you were working in the mine, and they went in to have beer to replace the salt that they lost from the bodies. I don't know whether that's true, but that was an idea put forward in one of these books. Moving forward, this is the children. There was no school at first, so they had to go to Kersley School, and they had to go through the bush, and they were lucky if they could get a ride on a boat boat that was going from Aberdeen South Mine into Kersley. They would get a ride on the back of the boat boat. Yes, this Mr. Henry Rolfe, he pushed and pushed and pushed and finally got a school in Abernethy for the kids so that they didn't have such a hard life. There wasn't all that much aspirational desires from the parents. They just wanted their kids to learn how to spell, how to do some adding up, taking away, and a bit of arithmetic. It was hard to get books, so they collected books from the community. They wrote on slates, and there was caning. This man writes about a very vicious teacher at Aberdeen Public School called Bushy Harris, a sadist who caned his students relentlessly. So those were the good old days. Not really. Moving on. This is the Bag School at Pursley. And I told the Scottish group, this photograph was lost and it was found on a rubbish tip in Victoria and handed in to the department. And somehow it got into the book that Neville wrote. So there are all the kids. Look at that big. Yeah, he would have to teach all of those kids. Moving on. These were the Scots that came out. They tended to be in managerial positions. You know, the James Keithley, he lived down from my grandparents in Abdare Road. David Murdoch, his children were taken to school in a sulky, driven by James Keithley's son. So they're just some of the Scots that I put in for the Scottish Special Interest Group. Moving on. All right, problems emerge. One of the main problems that I found this time around was the opening of the Panama Canal. And it made our competitors their coal much cheaper. They could get it to the markets for less and for quicker. And our coal had to travel vast distances in comparison. So that was one of the problems that they struck. And another one was the number of strikes. There were just an incredible number of strikes every week. You know, strikes on the Cessnock Coalfield. And the market price for coal slumped. Yes, I put that in here. I must have found it somewhere. So Caledonian Collieries survived. They reorganised and merged with J.A. Brown. They all merged eventually into Coal and Allied, the one big player. It sort of soaked up all of the little companies. And the pocket head at Aberdare South, it went to Queenstown on South Island of New Zealand. And the engine in the engine house, the big engine, it went to Zealand in New Zealand. So Caledonian Collieries must have had interest in the South Island of New Zealand as well, I think. All right, I thought I'd finish with a poem that Neville wrote about the closure of his mine. It's called Abandoned Colliery, written in the 1950s. Life left this pit in the long winter of 27. A headstone stands, a rounded, lofty stack, a chimney with no smoke to climb on air and breathing, a lean, cream pencil stick unswayed, writing a sad and pointless epitaph on the sky, a monument with dividends unmade. With hopes as high, they dug well down, pouring out the rock to light the way to darkness, down to coal, through strata grey and brown, puncturing this new pour in the hard flake skin of earth, slow geologic stab into the blackness. A boardroom tried divining this scene's worth. The screens are bent and sagged into a red-ribbed skeleton askew, eight and twisted beams of wooden sadness. Far in time, they are from skips that rumbled, crashed and stopped, and tumbled trunk black loads to wagons in a shoe, and dulled the shouts of men at work on top. This is no pretty pocket, no slender wench which stands astride the shaft and holds in stick-steeled strength the wheels that whirled and hauled on cable cage to pull the split black cargo up aloft and lift smudged men to live and spend their wage. In a sediment of silence is the promise that is gone. A pebble tossed down now will echo down the shaft, to clash and dash down deep, and muted splash in darkened stone. No regulation undertaker steps, but 1,500 feet of empty, dizzying, down, down deep, and steeped in death.
Thank you, Beverley, that was touching.